Hey everyone, I have a story for you that's straight out of a nightmare. It's been a few weeks since it happened, but I still get chills thinking about it. This isn't your typical hunting trip story. This is the kind of tale that makes you question what's lurking out there in the darkness. It was late October, and my friends and I decided to go on a hunting trip deep in the forest. There were 5 of us: me, Mike, Sarah, Dave, and Jenna. We were all seasoned campers, so we felt pretty confident about spending a few days out in the wild. The first day was perfect. The weather was crisp, the leaves were a vibrant mix of red and orange, and the forest was alive with the sounds of nature. We set up our camp near a small clearing and spent the day hiking and hunting. By nightfall, we were sitting around the campfire, sharing stories and enjoying the serenity of the woods. As the fire crackled and our laughter filled the air, I noticed something strange. About 50 yards away, just beyond the reach of our campfire's light, there were shadows. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but when I pointed it out, everyone else saw them too. Dark figures, standing silently among the trees, just watching us. "Who the hell are they?" Mike whispered, his voice shaky. We called out, but there was no response. The figures just stood there, unmoving. It was unsettling, but we tried to brush it off, thinking it was just some locals messing with us. We decided to keep the fire going all night and take turns keeping watch, just in case. The night was long and eerie. Every so often, we'd catch glimpses of those figures, always keeping their distance, always watching. When morning finally broke, the figures were gone. Exhausted and unnerved, we packed up our gear and decided to head back to our cars. It was a day's hike back, and we didn't want to spend another night out there. The hike was tense. We didn't talk much, just focused on putting one foot in front of the other. By late afternoon, we found a spot to set up camp for the night. As dusk settled, our fears were confirmed. The figures returned, lurking just beyond the firelight. This time, the feeling was worse. It was like they were closing in on us, their silent presence, a constant, oppressive weight. We didn't sleep at all that night. We sat in a circle, backs to the fire, eyes scanning the darkness. Every rustle, every snap of a twig had us on edge. As the first light of dawn crept through the trees, we didn't waste any time. We grabbed what we could carry and bolted, leaving behind our tents and heavier gear. The figures seemed to retreat as the sun rose, but we didn't stop to look back. We ran, adrenaline fueling our every step. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually we made it back to the parking area. We piled into the cars and sped out of there, the tension only easing once we were miles away from those woods. Even now, I can't explain what we saw. We've talked about it endlessly, trying to rationalize it, but there's no logical explanation. The figures, their silent, ominous presence. It was like something out of a nightmare. So, if you're ever out in the woods and you feel like you're being watched, trust your instincts. Sometimes, the darkness holds more than just shadows. This happened a few years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. As a lawyer with a high-stress job, hiking is my escape. There's nothing better than spending a few days in nature, away from the chaos of the city, to recharge my batteries. But one hike in particular made me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. After closing a particularly grueling case, I needed some R&R, and I decided to explore a new hiking trail for a change. It was a remote area that I had never been to before, and the thrill of discovering new places always excited me. I packed my gear and set out for a solo hike that was supposed to last a few days. The first couple of days were amazing. The trail was beautiful, the weather was perfect, and I felt more relaxed than I had in months. I immersed myself in the sights and sounds of the forest, enjoying the solitude and the break from my demanding job. On the third day, things took a turn for the strange. I was deep in the forest when I came across something that made my blood run cold. Hanging from the trees were strange objects, like twisted wooden symbols and crude carvings. At first, I thought they were just some sort of primitive art, or maybe a prank. But as I looked closer, I realized there was something much darker about them. Carved into the tree trunks were eerie symbols that I couldn't decipher. They looked like ancient runes, or some kind of ritualistic markings. Then I saw the animals. Dead animals, arranged in a way that looked deliberate, almost sacrificial. It was unsettling, but my curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I decided to take some pictures. I thought maybe I could show them to someone who might know what they were. As I ventured deeper into that section of the forest, the air grew colder, and the sense of unease intensified. That's when I saw it. A human head, impaled on a spike. The sight was so shocking that I froze in place, unable to process what I was seeing. The head looked fresh, the eyes lifeless, staring into nothingness. Panic surged through me, and I finally snapped out of my paralysis. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I was far away from that horrifying place. For years, I couldn't shake the image of that head from my mind. I didn't tell anyone about it, fearing they would think I was crazy. But recently, I came across an article about certain Aboriginal burial practices, where they burn their dead and sometimes hang the remains in the forest. It made me wonder if what I had stumbled upon was some kind of sacred site, though the ritualistic nature of the symbols and sacrifices didn't quite fit with what I read. To this day, I'm not sure what I encountered. Was it some kind of witchcraft, a burial site, or something else entirely? I may never know, but one thing is certain. I won't be hiking alone in unfamiliar places anytime soon. I want to share with you a story that's been haunting me for years. It's something that happened one night while I was camping with friends, and it's an experience that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It was a cool autumn evening, and my friends and I had decided to go camping to unwind from our hectic lives. We were deep in the woods, far from the city lights, enjoying the serenity that only nature could provide. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories, laughing, and drinking. At some point, I volunteered to gather more wood for the fire. I wandered further away from the campsite than I intended, lost in my thoughts. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of crickets and night creatures conspicuously absent. That's when I saw it, a light in the distance. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked towards it. The light was hovering, completely still, and there was no sound. The air was so still, it felt unnatural. As I got closer, the light suddenly shot up higher into the sky, and then dashed away at an impossible speed, disappearing into the night. I stood there, stunned and holding the pieces of wood I'd collected, trying to process what I'd just seen. Heart pounding, I ran back to the camp, clutching the wood tightly. When I got close, I stopped and debated whether to tell my friends. They might laugh at me, and the last thing I wanted was to be ridiculed for seeing something so bizarre. As I walked into the campsite, Josh, our loudmouth friend who was already drunk, chided me for taking so long. "About time, Jake. Did you get lost or what?" He slurred, his words heavy with alcohol. I decided to keep quiet about the light. As the night went on, we continued drinking and telling stories. Josh, being his usual brash self, eventually wandered off into the woods to relieve himself. We didn't think much of it. It was typical for him to stumble off when he was drunk. Hours passed, and it wasn't until Craig, who shared a tent with Josh, was getting ready for bed that we realized Josh hadn't returned. Panic set in as we called out for him, but there was no response. We scoured the area, shouting his name and using our flashlights to cut through the darkness. Nothing. Eventually, we called the authorities. They arrived and launched a full-scale search, combing through the woods for days. They thought he might have fallen somewhere or gotten lost in his drunken state. Despite their best efforts, they never found any trace of him. Josh had vanished without a trace. The image of that mysterious light and the unsettling silence of the forest that night replayed in my mind over and over. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had seen was connected to Josh's disappearance. But how could I explain that without sounding insane? To this day, I don't know what happened to Josh or what that light was. Maybe it was something explainable, or maybe it was something beyond our understanding. All I know is that night changed everything for me. Sometimes I wonder if I should have told my friends what I saw. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, but maybe, just maybe, it would have. Thanks for listening, and if you ever see something strange in the woods, trust your instincts. Stay safe out there.